Bon après-midi à tous. For those that don't know me, my name is Kim Wilson. I'm the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton, and welcome to this, our first Distinguished Speaker Series luncheon of 2025. I would like to acknowledge that the event today is hosted in the traditional unceded homeland of the Maliseet people. This homeland and all of New Brunswick are covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. Je tiens à souligner que l'événement aujourd'hui se déroule sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple Maliseet. Ce territoire ainsi que l'ensemble du Nouveau-Brunswick sont couverts par les traités de paix et d'amitié que les peuples Maliseet, Mi'kmaq et Passamaquoddy ont signés pour la première fois avec la couronne britannique en 1725. Les traités ne portaient pas sur la cession des terres et des ressources, mais reconnaissant en fait les titres des Maliseet, des Mi'kmaq et des Passamaquoddy et établissaient les règles de ce qui devrait être une relation continue entre les nations. I would like now to thank Deloitte, which has been our presenting sponsor of the Distinguished Speaker Series for several years now. We are happy to have you with us again here in 2025. After today's food service, Steve Lund, Managing Partner for Deloitte in New Brunswick and PEI, will introduce our guest speakers. But for now, I invite you to enjoy your meal, and we will be back shortly. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. On behalf of Deloitte, I'm Steve Lund. I want to say how proud we are to continue our partnership with the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton on the Distinguished Speaker Series, now going strong for over 5 years. To me, the Distinguished Speaker Series is all about one thing: elevating our business community through collaborative, timely discussions led by leaders who bring bold insights and fresh perspectives. Et aujourd'hui, on ne pourrait pas choisir un sujet plus pertinent. Unless you've been living under a rock lately, you know exactly what I mean when I say tariffs. Big deal for everyone. Not since the pandemic have we seen this level of chaos and uncertainty in our business environment. Personally, when I talk to clients, it's all about scenario planning, making smart tactical moves to protect business structures and strengthen supply chains, and then all those strategies can go out the window with a tweet. Tumultuous times indeed, but with chaos comes opportunity, in my humble view. And in rooms like this filled with smart, resilient business leaders, I have every confidence that we'll continue to rise, adapt, and thrive in Moncton. Now I have the pleasure of introducing not one, not two, but three exceptional speakers who will help us unpack today's topics. I'll keep the intros brief because there are three of them. First, we have Jerry Prati, President of Collaborative Canadian Energy Solutions. Jerry, with over 45 years of experience in energy, has served as the chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He uses his extensive background to advocate for Canadian energy and environmental policies and regulations that support the development of all forms of energy. Through his leadership, Jerry has played a significant role in shaping policies that aim to balance energy development with environmental responsibility. His expertise ensures that Canada's energy sector remains competitive, sustainable, and adaptable to the evolving global energy landscape. Second, we have Stuart Muir, CEO of Resource Works. Stuart is an award-winning journalist, recognized both in Canada and internationally before founding Resource Works in 2014. His career has marked a deep commitment to community engagement, particularly in support of natural resource development with a special focus on Western Canada. Stuart's work has been instrumental in building public understanding and support for natural resource infrastructure and operations, often navigating polarized debates with an optimistic and environmentally responsible outlook. Through his leadership, Stuart has consistently championed pragmatic approaches to complex issues, fostering constructive dialogue around natural resources. And last but not least, we have Tracy Bodnarchuk, CEO of Canada Powered by Women. Tracy is the CEO and one of the co-founders of Canada Powered by Women, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization amplifying women's voices in shaping Canada's energy future. With over 20 years of leadership experience, she has held senior roles at Deloitte, once upon a time, KPMG, Norton Rose, Fulbright, SAP, Microsoft, and Suncor Energy. A journalism graduate from Toronto Metropolitan University, she has completed executive programs at Queen's and the University of Toronto. Recognized as a Calgary Top 40 Under 40 alumna, Tracy actively serves on the board of the Settle Dome Foundation and Alberta Hospice and Palliative Care Association. So Greater Moncton, please join me in giving a warm round of applause for our guests.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Nous sommes très heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui parmi vous à Moncton. And with that, you've seen my capability in French, and I wish I was more fluent and could talk about some of these issues in French. This first slide you see the words Unleashing Canadian Potential. And this represents one of a series of events that we're conducting across the country. It started about a year ago in May when we had a conference in invitation only in Toronto. It was run by two think tanks, Macdonald Laurier and C.D. Howe Institute, and was supported by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council, manufacturers and exporters, and other elements of Canadian business. It was a great event, wonderful speakers, a day and a half long. At the end of it, though, the consensus conclusion was this is extremely important to have this discussion across the country. So we got together, Stuart and Tracy and I, and said, if we're going to do this, we need to have a vehicle, and the one we selected was the Canadian Chamber Network. As a former chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, I recognize the power of the network in terms of bringing, excuse me, people together to talk about these issues. And so we went to the AGM in Halifax last October, met Kim there, and this is the 6th or 7th of this series since then, and we've got about another 7 or 8 over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Not surprisingly, each one of these is quite different depending upon the interests of the Chamber, and it's changing every day with the changes in the global landscape. So we've got a very short period of time, and I'm going to be going through this quite quickly, but we're looking forward to the discussion and the Q&A. So I'm going to cover really quickly 5 areas. Kind of the tariff chaos, obviously huge implications for the US and Canada. And while this is happening, how strong is Canada to be literally going into a trade war, in a trade war? What do we need to do as a country? And then some final comments on who should set the agenda and what can each of us do in this whole process. First, the chaos. So these are 4 covers from the Weekly Economist magazine. Economist magazine out of the UK has been being produced since September of 1843. It is unbelievably unusual to have the same person on the cover 4 weeks in a row. This is the February 28th, March 1st, March 8th, March 15th edition. That's unprecedented. And I actually went back and looked at the covers. There's one every week, so there's 51 or 52 a year. And if you look at before the US election, there were 43 covers, 43 weeks. Trump was either explicitly or implicitly on the cover 4 times. In the 20 weeks since the election, he's been on the cover 13 times. So this is a magazine that comments on policy around the world and politics and technology and science. And it just shows you how chaotic the situation is when they felt the need to put him on the cover to discuss different aspects of the agenda that's unfolding. So, really quickly, chaos, tariff impacts on the US economy. Every day there's new analysis coming out. This is just a snapshot of some of the stuff that I picked up in the last couple of weeks. There's all sorts of estimates in terms of what the impact will be on U.S. growth, and this is tariffs across the board globally, not just Canada and Mexico. And some of the latest from Goldman Sachs is pretty significant drop in GDP growth in 2025. I've seen numbers as low as 0.5%. So literally, a quarter of the expected GDP growth because of the tariffs. Obviously, inflation impacts on employment, declines overall, but some really potentially serious impacts in different sectors. Trade balances. When you see the analysis, a lot of it is saying that maybe they're not going to be that significant when you do the puts and takes of tariffs on the U.S. and being put by other countries on them. I think one of the biggest issues is the one that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is really focused on, is that you've had a real erosion of market confidence. And we're seeing that in the markets, it comes and goes. And then the last piece is energy. Hugely integrated market, which remains to be seen what the impacts are going to be as it relates to Canada. But what all of this means is, without a doubt, there's going to be significant pushback on the U.S. administration from these changes. We're already beginning to see it. And for those reasons, a lot of people are saying, let's not overreact to the tariffs. It's going to evolve itself over time here in the U.S. And there are early indications that's going to happen. Obviously, what happens on April 2nd will have a huge influence, and the numbers will be crunched and scenarios will be redone once again. So PricewaterhouseCoopers just put out a study last week, which is really good. It's on their website. Encourage you to take a look at it. They did a survey of Canadian business, released it on March 19th. And they asked a number of questions, and it's relatively short. It's an easy read, but it's quite instructive. And so in what ways do you think your company will be exposed to U.S. tariffs? And number one, and just in the discussion around our table, that seems to be reinforced, is market uncertainty. How do you plan in this environment? It's extremely difficult because it's changing. The ground is shifting under our feet literally on a daily basis. Clearly, supply chain disruptions, which is something that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is really focused on as well. Reduced competitiveness and demand potentially, real concern over loss of U.S. market share. So, second chart that I pulled up, and this one I think is a bit more interesting, is so they're asking business, which of the following actions will you take to ensure the long-term viability of your organization? So obviously, if you can do it, look to expand to new markets. Pursue M&A if you're in a competitive advantage. Perhaps you already have assets in the U.S. Your competitors might not. There might be an M&A opportunity there. Accelerate, obviously, productivity investments. But this next one is one I think that's most concerning to Canada. 19% said they'd move some or all of their production activity to the United States. PwC further unbundled that in their commentary, and they said if you just look at industrial manufacturing and automotive industries, the number is 37%. So think about that. If 37% of that key sector of the Canadian economy potentially moved to the U.S. in the longer term, absolutely devastating in terms of the potential impact. So we can't underestimate that. So, as we deal with chaos, how strong is the Canadian position at the present time? And I just put this chart up, and there's several like it, tables that you could see that, we're clearly blessed as a country with an incredible potential, a wide range of resources. This is just a partial list. It doesn't have, Stuart's going to be talking about natural gas. It doesn't have natural gas on there. But you look at us compared to the U.S., we're better positioned than them in terms of global reserves. So we have this tremendous potential. Have we been able to use it effectively? I like looking at chief economist studies from the different banks. They're all saying basically the same thing. The one that I really like is Stéphane Marion out of Montreal with the National Bank. I find his analysis to be exceptional. He gave a presentation, and it's on the National Bank website and in his own personal website. And it goes back to November, just after the U.S. election. But he's looking fundamentally at the Canadian economy and how well can it handle it. So he has a couple of, I think, really, really important charts for us to consider. This first one, and you've probably seen variants of it, is real GDP per capita growth in the OECD. So the OECD countries, which is a very large set, as you can, if you can potentially, you can't read the numbers. Ireland's at the top. The little one, the green one, is the US. And so those numbers are Ireland, the growth over that period, 2015 Q1 to 2024 Q3, 42%. US is 18%. The overall average for G7 is about 13%, and others go all the way down. The little red one at the very bottom, ahead of Luxembourg, is Canada, with 1.4%. And that fundamentally is the issue that Canadian business around the country is concerned about, is our productivity has just gone nowhere. If you drill down a bit further on this and look at Canadian GDP per capita, simply against the US, and if you take 2016 as an index and let's take it, put a pin in it at that time, 2016, and put it on an index, where have they gone? Well, the US has increased dramatically up to 116 with that index of 100 in 2016, and we're back down to the 2016 level. The deep drop, of course, is COVID in the middle, which impacted both economies, but the US recovered tremendously. So this is before, obviously, any tariffs or any strategies to move foreign manufacturing into the US and build their economy. Why has this happened? Lack of investment. It's been impacted by our fiscal situation in terms of the amount of money that's going for government expenditures. It's impacted by the big increase in the denominator in terms of huge numbers of immigrants coming in, which reduces the per capita level as well. So a serious issue, and I think everyone is focused on it. I'm sorry that this stuff is a bit grim, but there is a way out of it in the future. This is GDP per capita in 2023. And it's a study done by Trevor Toome out of, he's a senior fellow at Macdonald Laurier and has done work with C.D. Howe Institute, and he's out of the University of Calgary. This has actually gotten quite a bit of coverage through the winter in different media outlets. You may have seen it. So he took the 50 US states and the 10 Canadian provinces, put them all on a common basis in terms of purchasing power, what economists call purchasing power parity, and he ranked them. So at the top is New York, and at the bottom is Nova Scotia. And unfortunately, as you can see in the chart on the left, many of the bottom ones are Canadian provinces, which is fundamentally our problem, is that we're not productive enough as an economy, and we have to find a way to get through that and change that very quickly. So what do we do about it? Well, to get the economy back on track, I think the message has to be that there's urgent action, but it has to be substantive. This is not a time to tweak on the edges. This has got fundamental change. Taxes, most of the analysis you see here is at the federal level, but taxes are a problem federally, provincially, municipally. We had a session, Stuart and I, in Victoria, and Stuart, I think you'd agree that we were amazed at how municipal issues kept coming up, property taxes, and again, making business in that area uncompetitive. Personal tax rates are significantly higher than our US competition, and business taxes, you know that yourself, are higher. Government spending. In 2015-16, we had 257,000 federal employees. In 2024, there's 363,000, an increase of 43%. Employment over that same time period in the rest of the economy went up 15%. We can't afford to keep adding to the civil service. And again, those are just federal numbers. Those are Statistics Canada numbers. And they actually say in their most recent report, they now want to look at provincial and municipal. And I suspect the scene will be quite similar. Regulation. 2006, we had 234,000 federal regulations. In 2021, there was 321,000. Expectations of many as 350,000 this year. The regulatory system is making it very difficult for investment to come in, for business to have confidence they can move forward and make money. The Canadian immigration system, there's early indications it's being reformed. It needs significant reform to match the skills that are needed in the country for business to get the right people to work on. And they're reducing kind of temporary and foreign workers to do that. Just a couple more charts. In Thunder Bay, we had one in Thunder Bay a couple of weeks ago, and Jack Mintz accompanied me, and this was his summary chart. Jack gave a presentation. The focus in Thunder Bay was very much on mining and forestry. And the discussion was around, can we do this with some marginal reforms in the tax system and the regulatory process in the country? And this is Jack's concluding page. It says, no, it's got to be a big bang. You have to look at what economies like Ireland did over the last 15 years to really turn their economy around and make it, as you saw, one of the most productive and growing economies in the world. His recommendation is a tax cut that can be accomplished with spending cuts, get the spending levels down, and move away from subsidies to support politically selected investments, like battery plants in Ontario. So he recommended a set of changes around simpler and flatter income taxes with lower rates and corporate tax exemptions for reinvested profits. Real opportunity there to turn things around. So I want to show these in terms of how concerned are you about Canada's economic productivity trajectory. In January of this year, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce started a study looking at, they call it an inflection point, a plan for a competitive, productive, prosperous Canada. And it had a wide range of recommendations. But what I found really interesting is they employed Crestview strategy to do a survey of Canadians across the country, not just Calgary, not just Alberta, across the country. And they asked them, I'm showing two charts. This first one is, how concerned are you about Canada's economic productivity trajectory? And as you can see, 78% of Canadians are concerned, which is not surprising. That number is probably higher than when this survey was done in early January right now. But the next one was really significant, I think, is they asked who should set the agenda. And 63% of Canadians believe business should drive Canada's economic agenda. And the 17 and 5 are governments. 17 is government should set the course with businesses following, or 5% government should drive Canada's economic agenda. And that's the message that I want to leave you with here today, is that business has to take the lead at this time. They cannot be silent. So my last chart is, what can each of us do? Well, obviously, educate not only yourself, but your colleagues, your employees, inform yourselves. The fact that you're here at this event is clear indication that you're doing that. Analysis. Only you can analyze your own situation, your own company, your own business situation, what you need to be successful. And then network. Network at the national level, as we do, as chambers do nationally, but provincially, municipally, business, and at your personal level. You have to talk to people. And then let's use our voices. We demand fundamental change. Don't be satisfied with marginal change. And that message, I think, is really resonating with chambers across the country. And I look forward to the Q&A where we can discuss this further. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Jerry. I'm Stuart Muir, and I have got my little presentation here. This, to me, is quite dynamic, up to the minute, as much as I could make it for today, because we're in an interesting period of time now where everyone's paying attention to the news who wasn't before. A resource vision. Now, is there a clicker, Jerry, that I could... a resource vision. I'm going to talk mainly about energy, but I think the natural resource story of Canada is significant. This is the latest information from Natural Resources Canada, as good as it gets. The number of energy projects that we could be building, in some cases are building, 340, a huge number of mines, critical minerals projects, forestry, all this potential. This can easily be viewed at NRCan's website. From an outside point of view, If you look at the Financial Times, ft.com, they recently published a map. They're kind of saying, hey, Canada, you got things going on there. Well, maybe you should giddy up a little bit. That's a fabulous map they published last week in the FT. It's on the website. And everywhere in the country, including here in New Brunswick, there is all kinds of potential. So why aren't we activating it? Well, I'm of the view that there are some things that we are putting in front of ourselves that are stopping us from doing that. I hear from not just industry, I hear from worker groups, I hear from different government voices that we have legislative, these are federal things, and we can talk provincial, but federally, the Impact Assessment Act, permitting times, I think generally across parties, at least the two parties that typically have the most seats in a parliament, there's a general kind of agreement. The emissions cap, maybe a little more argumentation, new methane rules. These are all factors, legislative factors or regulatory ones that can impede the growth potential. And if you say, well, that's just your opinion, you want resources, I would point you to the Parliamentary Budget Office website. They just published an evaluation of one of those 4 pictures, the emissions cap. The PBO said that this would cause a $20.5 billion reduction in the Canadian economy because some call it a production cap. It would mean less production, not less emissions. And now we all want less emissions, but do we want less production? By doing this policy as it is now on the books to be implemented, we're looking at, according to the PBO, that many jobs, 40,300 jobs reduction in 2032. So we have those great opportunities. One of the realities of how we use energy, which is kind of at the heart of all this, whether you're in this part of the country or otherwise, we use fossil fuels very heavily. It's 3/4 or higher of our energy needs, and we're always trying to diversify that, as we should. And I'm well aware of the many programs and initiatives underway in Atlantic Canada in this regard, but the fact is it's incredibly hard for humanity anywhere in the world to move the needle on this, and we have to keep trying. If you listen to the energy discourse, usually there's a buzz phrase, we hear energy transition. If you look at what's really happening in the world, it's been postulated by quite a few scholars of energy increasingly in the last year. Maybe it's not a transition if year after year, and that's from 1800 up until now, that from on the left, when mostly our predecessors burned wood and maybe starting coal and so on, and now we burn all these things and we add new things. It's actually an energy addition that's going on. And if you're trying to solve the problems and think about things, and all you're thinking about is this energy transition, we have to get off this, we have to get off that. But really what people are doing is using more of everything, not less of anything. Then I think that's a way to think about it that could be more solution-oriented. I look at coal, for example. It's become a staple of the of advocacy groups to say coal is dead, thank goodness. Coal generation, I know you've got some coal here. That neat little chart shows over the years the predictions of the demise of coal. And the most recent prediction of the demise of coal is the white line, but the yellow line is a few years ago when the forecasters were saying, we're managing to reduce the amount of coal we use because it's the highest emissions fuel that we have in our lives. And we're predicting by 2020 will be way, way down. But then the next year it started to go up. And then the year after it went up again. And now the white line, the current year, we're just predicting more coal than ever. So it's a historic high in coal. Well, that's because there are parts of the world that need more energy, because India and China and other countries in that part of the world especially, but Africa too, are not going to settle for energy poverty in their lives. It doesn't really matter what external voices tell them they should do or shouldn't do. This is what they're doing. They're driving that white line upward. That's what's happening. The example here, you look at the China large red band towards the bottom, it's just getting bigger and bigger. Same again this year. That being the case, and the quest for perfect solutions has been frustratingly slow to arrive. What can we look at that is practical within our reach? I'd like to do a little comparison of LNG and green hydrogen. I know that these are sort of similar. They're both gaseous fuels, but there's some differences. And I don't say this is a knock on one or the other or trying to promote one. I'm just saying the fact of the matter is that if you look down this column, and I'm happy to provide this deck for anyone who wants to reflect on it later, but green hydrogen, currently there's no exports of green hydrogen. There's no established shipping technologies or tankers in service. There's not yet a commodified status of being able to trade hydrogen futures or that. Emissions, zero emissions, that's the one where we all love, zero emissions hydrogen, if it's made certain ways. And then the model of exporting it, the value chain is still being prototyped. Then LNG, actually for every row there, LNG is a mature, existing method of getting natural gas from point A to point B by ocean cargo. So that's a striking comparison, and I often think of it when I'm looking at some of the promises made. We're going to do this, we're going to have this by this date, and I'm looking at this chart and I'm thinking, okay, which are we going to tackle first? So I look at what the United States has tackled first. They've said, let's tackle natural gas as LNG, and they've become, in only a few short years, the world's #1 exporter of LNG, all from the Gulf Coast. If you look at the status of LNG projects, I'm quite excited that in only a few weeks, the first export project in Canada will go live, probably in June, and that's LNG Canada in Kitimat. It's often described as Canada's largest ever private sector investment because of the upstream and the pipeline needed to service this huge facility in Kitimat. That's the thick red band there. The light gray ones, those are the American ones that have been built already. They've dominated the space, but you go upward there's actually 3 red ones. Those are Canadian LNG projects. So it's actually a real thing. It's bringing real jobs, real investment to Canada. The smaller ones at the top into the future, that's wood fiber LNG, that's near Vancouver. Cedar LNG, which is historic because it's owned by the Haisla First Nation. It's an incredible investment. But still, look what a small aggregate slice is Canadian LNG in that picture. And there are those talking, I've assembled this with some help from some industry folks showing the potential for, I'll just use that that's how much natural gas is produced in Canada today, that gray on the left. And then that green one there, that's LNG Canada. When that goes live in June and the first cargo leaves Kitimat, probably valued at $100 million, what's inside the vessel, that will be the first stage there. And if you look at all the other potential projects and different uses, including AI centers, more LNG, more gas pipeline, to say 2035, it could be forecast that Canada could double the amount of natural gas it produces. An imperfect but improved form of fuel that humanity clearly needs more of. And this does not include any of the potential Eastern Canada production. I know no one's really talking about that now, so I'm not saying it's a going thing, but you think about the Utica Shale goes up the St. Lawrence all the way to Quebec City, huge amount of gas that could be produced. I know suddenly people are talking about the method by which it has to be produced, and then it gets into the mix, but where I live in British Columbia, people are very happy with the method of producing natural gas that we have. It's safe, it's high tech, it's creating all kinds of benefits. And the benefits, that scenario, if you do that, the full double, you've got capital spending, $30 billion a year to do that, $100 billion a year in export revenues, and then also, here's the really sweet piece, which is a legit reduction in emissions, which is what we all want to see. And right now, this is the CFIB, the latest, I think, from their website yesterday. This is your business confidence, or the business confidence of the members. Even in 2020, at the height of COVID, this is where we are now. It's worse. Even in 2008, during the world meltdown, it wasn't this bad. So I think we're all feeling kind of despondent right now, and I do feel that we're not without opportunities, and I hope we can pursue them as a country. Thank you.
Well, I recognize that we're supposed to be in Q&A right now, so I'm going to go fast. And also, I hope you've been digging into the brownies, because I can't wait to get to the table to eat mine. Let's see. So just while we're teeing up, thank you for having us. Again, I'm Tracy from Canada Powered by Women. And so we've been talking about some big heady issues that are like way up here, and I'm gonna bring it here to women, people, individuals, and effects of energy policy on daily life. So our organization's been around for 6 years, and we advocate for an audience of women that want to have a say around energy policy and effects on the economy in this country. And our audience, I will share, is pretty homogenous. And what I mean by that is when you look at typical demographics, there's nothing that stands out like income or education or age. What really stands out is an interest in having an influence on energy policy and wanting to have a say in that, because making a connection to an energy sector thriving and a Canadian economy that thrives as well. When we first started our work, we also found from Engaged Women that most felt that energy policy would affect other industries, which we see: agriculture, transportation, forestry, all the types of, if you think about energy policy, like the carbon tax is an energy policy, that affects everyone. Well, sort of. There's a change recently, but the industrial carbon tax will affect all industries and emitters. So when we started our work, our audience was 24% of women in Canada, and now it's 42%. That is as of this January. And what I will tell you is Engaged Women are very curious, informed, they take in the news, and they really have opinions about all of this stuff. And when they say that they like policy, I mean, I don't know how about you, but I like policy. I'm a bit of a policy junkie. I like to follow different parties, and we're nonpartisan. Our audience of Engaged Women goes across the political spectrum. So actually, 48% of this audience says they're right in the middle. They don't say they're left, they don't say they're right, they're in the middle. And that's important because they're formulating opinions. We happen to be in election cycles, and Engaged Women intend to vote. So when you look at the intentions to vote, this is compared to Canadians overall. Clearly, Canadians are prepared to vote, and we see that in our data. But what's really important to them, and sorry this is an eye chart, but for some of you that might want to take a look, what is the #1 issue right now? And it's absolutely healthcare. And that's across the country. That's not any particular province, followed by the economy and taxes. And we've done, what we're seeing is the impact of policies in general on our daily lives are becoming very focused on our standard of living. So for the last 3 years, when we've done our national research, the policy priorities have been the exact same thing every time: successful economy with jobs, energy security, and then the environment or climate change, reduction of emissions. This is a dramatic departure from what we've been seeing the last couple of years. And what you see is like personal well-being, my family. And what's interesting is the idea that there's a connection to the funding of all of these things from the energy sector. So we see that in some of our research. But you'll also see that taxes is really important to women, as is affordable, reliable energy and housing. So not really surprising, right, when you think about an affordability crisis, that you have policy priorities that are going to influence voting decisions that are very tied to the well-being of families and individuals. So when we looked at energy policy, so we always lead with the economy. So in our advocacy work, we do go and talk to policymakers, and the way we do it is we'll share, we would like you to know what this audience, this public opinion research says, or what women think about these issues. And I'm sure many of you have thought about some of this because you're dealing with it in your business. And the women that we work with they're business owners, they're raising families, they're making purchasing decisions. So they're your customers, they're your staff, yourselves. And right now, what we've seen in our research is that they're finding that energy policy just makes their life harder. and specifically in Atlantic Canada, which, by the way, when we do our research, it's proportionate to the population, but we actually boosted Atlantic Canada so we could make sure that what we had was very solid in terms of results for Atlantic Canada. Oh, there it is, it's back. And Atlantic Canada identifies energy as being the most expensive than any other provinces in the country, followed by Alberta. What's funny is you would be amazed at how many commonalities there are between Alberta and the Maritimes. Maybe because you've been very connected to the energy sector, the oil sands, I don't know, but you often see common ground between these provinces. And we also, what we thought was interesting was we asked about future energy policies. So we know current policy, like the carbon tax, for example, and how people feel about that. But we asked about pending policy, like the emissions cap. And what we did see was that women really thought that future policies would really negatively affect their personal finances. And you can see that they didn't anticipate that they would do a lot for reducing emissions. So the whole idea of just financial hardship is anticipated, where actual, true, legitimate reduction of emissions is not anticipated. So there's an imbalance in that policy that needs to be sorted out. This 59% of women finding energy unaffordable was asked last March before the April carbon tax increase. So you can only imagine what that would be now. New research that just came in last week that will roll out soon, these numbers are substantially higher. So of course we'll see a shift with the consumer carbon tax reduction, but it doesn't account for indirect impact to finances and affordability. And in terms of the energy policy mix, I think really what I'd like to say here is I actually think there's a good optimistic story, because you might be feeling like, wow, this is really a lot, like Debbie Downer stuff. It is kind of, but at the same time, there's so much opportunity. These numbers from the research that are just coming in are like through the roof in terms of recognition of natural resources as an engine, a superpower that we could have for the economy for Canada. The support for tech and innovation is there. Also, natural gas and and it's really liquid natural gas, to your point. Women understand that if that is a fuel that displaces a higher emitting fossil fuel, they support it. And they want to see production while still pursuing tech and innovation. So what they have been feeling is that energy policy is overweighted to the environment. Now, I know that's a big statement I just made, but most people think that women would put the environment first. And the environment is in the top priorities, but not at the expense of standard of living, the economy, prosperity. And what women want is policy that's balanced, that accounts for all of these things, as opposed to all this or all that. So we also know that there's a lot of great support for tech. All I wanted to identify here is that in a region, women will think about energy top of mind with what's natural to their region. So of course, hydro here. And we do see a scenario where women across the country, engaged women across the country, see fossil fuels as part of the enduring energy mix. That doesn't mean a free-for-all production, polluting, emitting scenario. You've got to have, they want tech and innovation, carbon capture storage, and so on, and are looking for industry and government to partner, stop fighting, partner, and just get on with doing both things and having continued responsibly produced energy. And just on LNG, I think Stuart said a lot there, but the partnering piece and the innovation is a critical point. And I know you've got some really interesting things that are going on in this province with your energy. So I'm going as fast as I can. I will wrap by saying we would like to build out in Atlantic Canada. So if you are interested in Canada Powered by Women and getting involved in this conversation, please come see me after, because we are wanting to have a truly national conversation. And currently we are in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario, and we're looking to make our way to Atlantic Canada. So thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. Took lots of notes. So now we do have time for a Q&A before we wrap up. I'm not above pointing people out in the audience, those that know me. If you don't have a question, somebody's got to have a question. So I'm going to open up to see. We do have a mic, Xavier. If any, Xavier's got the mic. Do we have any? Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Justin Dion, for your first question of today.
Yeah, no,
Kicking us off.
I like the natural resources thing, but there's two. There's the climate change, and then there's the drill, baby, drill, if you want to call them. How do you balance that to please both and be in the middle kind of thing? Like, we need to develop our natural resources, I agree. Our economy needs it. So how do you answer both sides?
If I could touch on that one, I think it's important to ask the question when it comes to exporting resource products. Why is someone making a purchase decision? Because that country, maybe in the case of the West Coast, maybe it's Korea or Japan. These are countries that respect the Order of Nations and are part of the climate framework globally. They are approaching these problems as importers of commodities that have to fit into their regulations. And they're going to do everything they have to do to use the things they import in the way that they need to respect their democracies and their agreements. We can rely on that. We don't have to, make them promise to do it, because it's why they want this fuel. So from the producer side, I think we also have our own regulatory approach to it. Some things we've encouraged, others we haven't. And the result of that is the options we have now. Natural gas is still an option that we have. And I think one of the, if you look at where is investment in technology, high-tech manufacturing technology, in Canada today, the greatest amount of that investment is in energy, specifically oil and gas, but it's also in mining. And it might be a little bit in Shopify, but they don't need to have that sort of high specification, high performance gear they're making to run things in the field that creates so much employment in high precision manufacturing. That's my answer.
I have an answer to that as well, is that, we have to be able to have honest dialogue about what is actually happening with our energy and our energy producers. And things like Bill C-59 really kill that dialogue, because we can't even talk about environmental performance anymore. And that is really fundamentally a problem, because you have to acknowledge if one particular fuel is lower emitting than another, if a technology does this or does that. And if you can't have that open, creative conversation about that, then you're really hampering solutions. And that's really problematic. I know in my work, it really affects what I say and what I write and how we have conversations.
I'd only add that it is a balance, but I think if you look at where Canada has positioned itself over the last 10 years, the balance has been completely on the climate change side. So we've told foreign governments, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, desperately wanted our gas, knowing they couldn't get it tomorrow, but their longer term planning, they wanted Canadian LNG. That there was no business case, and we can't supply it, when clearly we've got the potential, and as Stuart's charts show, it's grown tremendously elsewhere in North America. There's no reason why we can't continue to improve our climate performance but still supply that market and create all that revenue for Canadians.
Thank you. We have another question. Francesco.
First of all, thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for taking the leadership of having this meeting. Now, I think that this was a very enriching tripartite panel, because you've touched on a number of things that were extremely insightful. The resources that we have, the general productivity fear, the having everybody, men, women, 100% of the population behind some of the decisions. There's one thing, and it's not a challenge, but it's a thought that I need to share with you, though. I don't see the direct correlation between the taxes and the hiring of civil servants. With the taxes, Canadians don't just pay the civil service, they pay a number of services and what they believe is the Canadian way of life. You've all seen, we don't want to be Americans because they have to pay their insurance. We have our Medicare. We have education. We've just seen now down in the States, the Department of Education being dismantled. And so I don't see that the productivity would necessarily go up if you would have lesser taxes or lesser spending. As a matter of fact, some of the Scandinavian countries that have probably 70% taxes are amongst the most productive ones and technologically advanced ones. So I'm curious to, on the other end, to see if a traded balance or across the provinces, we have the western provinces that have a balance trade that's more balanced. It's pretty much 50-50 across the continent and with other area. On their west side, we, for example, have a very imbalanced trade here in the Maritimes. We've got 95% of our exports are going to the States. Is relying on this facility maybe the reason why we have not innovated? Should we looking for other markets more aggressively so to have a better productivity rate? I don't have the answer, but I think that there's something in there that needs to be discussed precisely for the education piece that you said before, to educate ourselves.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the trade piece, I think every business that has the potential to diversify their markets away from the U.S. are looking at those opportunities. Those don't happen overnight. If you need to get your product to Tidewater, you might need to expansion in transportation capability. The plumbing in North America is very much north and south, and I'm not surprised that you see those statistics for New Brunswick. So I think that will happen. But in the interim, we don't have investment occurring. And now we've got concerns because of a prime objective, and who knows what their objectives are in the administration, but if their prime objective is to shift as much manufacturing capability into the US, we have to respond to that. And the way we'll get the investment in is by being competitive in our tax system. And one of the avenues to be able to reduce taxes, particularly for the corporate sector, but also personal taxes, is we're going to have to do it through, we can't just do it without recognizing that we have expenditures that we have to manage. And I'm not suggesting in any way that we need to look at health or education, as you said, like they're doing in the US, but we can do things to make our bureaucracy more efficient. So that's just one element. But there's a number of factors that will influence whether companies and businesses will choose to invest in the country. And I think that's one of them.
Okay. Another question at the back? Don Moore.
How you doing? Great presentation. I really appreciate this. I wonder if you could connect this for me to all these threat of tariffs or the current tariffs and so on, and or interprovincial trade barriers.
Do you want me to go? Yeah, we didn't mention interprovincial trade barriers. I think what's happening in the country right now is fantastic if we actually get it done. But in the past, there's been a lot of attempts to reduce interprovincial trade barriers, and those of you that are moving product across the provinces, you know what you're dealing with in terms of, somebody mentioned that, you had to have a different safety kit in the truck, from one province to the other. Stuff like that, if it can get removed quickly, it's going to help that. It's very difficult, for example, on the labor side, for labor mobility especially for professional organizations across the country. So to hear, all the parties saying that has to happen and be a top priority, that's going to help. I don't think interprovincial trade barriers by itself is going to solve some of the issues that are in front of us, but it's a key component.
I think I would add too that, you know, our whole purpose is to advocate for sound energy policy. And when you see, for example, that there's a level of acceptance for women and a balancing of environmental considerations with the economy and standard of living and all that good stuff, that's what they're looking for from policy and for policymakers. And if you want to, if we're going forward to be leveraging our resources and our energy, then we have to have policy that actually enables that and is less punitive. Thank you.
Robert Oudou. We have time for your last question.
There's one right here.
Do we have a mic for, yes?
It was really interesting, the tone you took when you said that. Je m'appelle Robert Oudou, je suis avec Expansion Dieppe. So our mandate at Expansion Dieppe, part of our mandate is to develop the industrial park land and bring services into the industrial park land. Obviously, this has been a question, and this has been, you know, an ongoing issue about availability of land, et cetera. In your presentation, one of your presentations, I think there was a bit of a mention of a disconnect between the development and also the environmental concerns. I think that's very much you know, an issue that we're having. I'll call you later. It's very much an issue that we're having, and I'm not advocating more for one or the other. I think they're both important, but I think there needs to be a balance that is stricken. On arrive à une balance là-dedans. So you know, it'd be interesting to see what could, practically speaking, be done by our government or by the business community lobbying with our government. And you come from other jurisdictions, you might have some key pieces of information or advice. So that would be one part of my question, and then the other part of my question is because you also talked about taxes. There was a report done by Jupia recently in the last year that had been looking at best practices in other markets about the taxation and maybe incentives to bring investment in certain areas. So, and one of those was property taxes, and you did mention that earlier as well. So again, attracting investment, the current environment we're in is not really favorable to Canada to attract investment. I think there are things that can be done to contradict that, to counter that. By focusing on Canada and not focusing on what's going on south of the border. So, you know, with those two things in mind, what would you say to the business community being some practical steps to take in order to maybe lobby government or other things that could be done? I think that'd be really insightful because I don't have the answer.
You know, the most common thing I hear from senior government levels is don't come, you know, said to industry, to companies, is don't come telling me what you need me to do. Have my communities, if they believe that the thing you want is what they want, be the ones to do that. And I think the convening potential of the chamber movement is actually one of the best things going when it comes to that. I mean, this is I don't know what all businesses you're in, but I'm pretty sure you're diversified in lots of interesting ways. And when you take the walls down of this room and you communicate with the communities, the specific communities where maybe an infrastructure, a park is being, you know, hearing from the local residents, hearing from the stakeholder groups in labor, in conservation and land management. You know, sometimes we think there's just one voice in the environment, the voice of no. Well, actually there's all kinds of voices in environmental stewardship and looking after the land, the water, the air, lots of different interests, but sometimes just one is the loudest note, and that's all that politicians hear. And as a chamber, I think there are so many ways that you can bring those communities together. They trust you. You see these people every day. Use that trust to build the voices that the decision makers hear.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's a great question. When you historically look at chambers' recommendations to government, right from the national chamber down to individual chambers, there's two characteristics. Like the Canadian chamber will pull out, you know, 82 recommendations on policy, right? And what the governments tend to do is look at it and say, well, you're asking for everything, you know, we'll see what we can work on and we'll get back to you. And maybe there's a bit of change here and there. I think that when I remember historically, they responded well on unemployment insurance. And then the other aspect of it at the provincial and municipal chamber level is it's often help us reduce the cost of doing business. And that's the statement. And what do governments do with that? What I think you need to do is be very specific on 2 or 3 items. As a group, you come together and you say, you know, Dieppe, Moncton needs this. And we need this to do the following. And maybe it's 2 or 3 tax items, maybe it's regulatory, easing regulatory, maybe it's removing non-tariff barriers, whatever, and at the municipal, provincial, federal level. And then just hammer it and just speak up and say, you know, remember, they work for you. You don't work for the government. And I think we've lost a bit of that over the last 20 years where we've tried to do everything to appease and please and fit with their objectives. They need to respond to what you need to be successful businesses in your area. So being very specific and bring them in, doesn't matter, and have your network talk. I think that can be a successful model.
Yeah, be a collective, like you just said about having your network talk. And surprisingly, we get into a lot of rooms because we're representing a substantial voice, and you have a substantial voice. So leveraging the chamber is so important because that's the power of it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid that is all the time that we have to get you back to work for the rest of your day. I want to thank Jerry, Stuart, and Tracy for joining us here today, sharing their wisdom. And remember, to use our voices is a key word as we leave here today. I also want to thank Charles Lee Brune, who is here today, who really helped coordinate to bring all of this event together. I want to thank the staff at the Wingate Hotel for the venue and the meal today, and also to Sonic Audiovisual, who always does a fantastic job of supporting all of our tech needs here, and also to the team at the Chamber and our board of directors, many of whom were here today, for helping us attending these events, to the team for pulling off these events. A lot of details go into pulling off things like today. I want to thank all of our members for attending today. We have a full list of upcoming events, so there's not a shortage of things. So you layer on tariffs, and you layer on a federal election, lots going on. So please stay tuned for some upcoming events. We'll have a few new ones with the federal election being recently called, so please stay tuned at ccgm.ca. You'll see the entire list there. I want to wish all of you a great rest of your week. Merci encore et bonne journée. Thanks for coming.